I don't think you should buy an Audi Q4 e-tron. Let me tell you why. Now let me start by saying that the great thing about living in the free world is that we're all entitled to our own opinions, and we can buy whatever we like, really. There's an awful trend on social media, particularly where EVs are concerned, for people to get very tribal about the particular car that they've bought. This is going to be a reasonably negative review of the Audi Q4 e-tron, but if you own one and you love it, that's absolutely great as well. I'm not attacking you personally, and I want nothing more than for you to be completely satisfied with your car. It just wasn't really for me. Hopefully that will cut down on the number of people banging on in the comments about how I've gravely insulted them just because we don't all like the same things, hey? Back in November last year, the e-tron 55 I had went back to Onto, and they replaced it with a Q4, which they just brought onto their fleet. If you haven't seen the series of videos about the e-tron 55 that I made at the time and you'd like to check it out, please do. There's a link in the description. This was probably the first mistake on my part. Driving an £80,000 plus e-tron 55 and a Q4, which is significantly cheaper, back to back was probably doomed from the start. They're not really comparable, it's not fair to compare them, and nor should they be. The Q4 is significantly less expensive. I also really liked the e-tron 55, although it's not without its flaws. It was right up my street. Comfort and luxury in spades, as I've said many times before, it was a luxury Audi that happened to be electric, rather than its drivetrain being its sole defining purpose. I'd have one tomorrow if I had the spare cash, no doubt about it. I tried though to be subjective with the Q4 and assess it on its own merits. The model I had from Onto was a Q4 40 S-Line with the comfort and sound packs. £999 a month, if you're so inclined, which sounds like an awful lot of money to rent a sub £50,000 car. But actually, looking at them on traditional lease deals, in that trim, it seems to be a pretty expensive car to lease. And of course, nobody anywhere has one in stock. If you want to be driving one now, Onto's probably about your best bet. We're not talking about a bottom of the range car here either. At £51,500 on the road, we're well up the range with the 40 S-Line, which of course comes with an 82 kilowatt hour gross battery. That's just under 77 kilowatt hours of usable battery, and it promises us a 293 mile WLTP range. 204 PS and a 0 to 60 time of 8.5 seconds. It almost sounds a little underwhelming in this crazy arms race of EV power we find ourselves in, which is a bit mad when you think about it, really. So when it was delivered, the first thing that struck me was the interior. Being an S-Line, it's not the bottom of the range by any means, but the cloth seats, yep, leather is an optional extra, were dull looking, they were hard, they were uncomfortable, and this trend continues with some of the interior plastics. Now I hate it. I hate nothing more than when car reviewers bang on about the quality of plastics, as if you spend half your life stroking a dashboard. But it really isn't good news in some places in the Q4. Some of the plastics used are way below what you might expect from a car at this price point, in my opinion. I'm not sure how the other cars built on this platform, like the ID4 or the Skoda Enyaq, compare on that front, but I definitely thought the Q4 was a little bit low rent inside than it ought to be, considering it's a over £50,000 Audi. I'll give it its due. It had a very similar infotainment system to the one you'd find in its bigger brother, and they had the digital cockpit instrument cluster and all that stuff with the customisable displays, which was all quite nice, and I guess that's probably becoming rather standard in a lot of new Audi models. And it's all the better for it. Really nice system, really well polished, really nice to use. Whilst it had actual physical buttons for the climate control, always welcome because I don't think these functions should be left to touchscreens, they were a little bit clunky to use, and the buttons themselves below the LCD display aren't illuminated at night, which I thought was just a very strange omission. What I will say is a major plus point that they haven't gone down that route of having the weird touchscreen that does everything, which the bigger e-tron did have, and it definitely deserves a favourable mention. Some controls in cars need to be physical buttons. the climate control is one of them. You shouldn't be wondering if you're pressing in the right spot while you're driving down the road. You should be able to do it without even looking. We need to keep the buttons there, and the Q4 gets that right, even if I didn't love them. Let's stop worrying about stroking the dashboard for a minute and talk about how it actually drives. The first thing I noticed was actually how slow it is. And that's a ridiculous thing to say about a car with a 0 to 60 time of 8.5 seconds. Lackluster would probably be the best way to describe it, just no sense of urgency at all. Given it tips the scales at just over 2 tonnes, maybe I shouldn't be too surprised. Maybe the higher power 50 model would be more to my liking, but the Q4 certainly won't win any awards for performance. The ride and handling wasn't much better either. The suspension seemed to be stupidly firm. You feel absolutely every bump in the road. Now, I assume this is an effort to present some kind of sporty image. It's the S-Line after all. But it's a 2-ton SUV, and it would be better off without such a ridiculous setup. Perhaps the non-S-Line models come with suspension that's a little bit softer, but I just hated every mile I had to cover in it. It was just horrible. One area where I'd actually, believe it or not, rate the Q4 fairly highly was on practicality. It had a decent sized boot, ample room in the back, everything you need really from a car of this size. I'd say it could really do with some storage up front though, for the charging cables, and the omission of any kind of frunk deprives it of that, despite having a huge bonnet. But Audi are definitely not the first, and they won't be the last manufacturer to neglect that area. Would it really kill them to put some storage up front? Some moulded plastic trays that sit on top of the power electronics that are under the bonnet. It can't be that difficult, can it? Plenty of other manufacturers manage it. Why has that been left out? It's poor. Next up, driver aids. Now I moan about these a lot, and for a lot of cars I'm driving, it's a constant sort of bugbear. And then it's not exclusive to the Q4 at all in being annoying, but it seemed even more skilled in winding me up than usual. There was no discernible way to turn off the lane assist function for anything more than a short period of time, so it would keep turning itself back on. And it was hugely annoying and hugely oversensitive. Audi may not be totally at fault here, because I know that the industry as a whole, driven by regulation, is moving more and more towards these features being permanent and stopping the driver from being able to override them. But it definitely detracts from the already pretty miserable driving experience. I actually suspect that the car I was using might have been a little bit faulty as well, because it would often bong at me and come up with a warning on the display to put my hands on the steering wheel, despite just driving along normally in a straight line. My MG ZS EV would do that if you had MG Pilot on, this sort of the adaptive cruise auto steering thing, and took your hands off the wheel. Obviously, it would then tell you to put your hands back on the wheel, a bit like Tesla Autopilot does as well. But the Q4 would just do this, just driving along the road normally. None of the sort of, cruise control systems engaged or anything like that. And it would just do this, it would bong and it would tell me to return my hands to the wheel. So very, very confusing. And if I had it any longer, I'm sure I would have had to get it checked out at a dealer, because it definitely seemed to me like it was faulty. But I'd be really interested to hear, if you own a Q4 and you've seen it do that, I'd really want to hear from you, because I want to know whether it's just a quirk of the system or whether my car definitely had some issues. It was very weird, but it was very annoying. Everybody's favourite EV topic next, range and consumption. Everybody's obsessed, aren't they? With an advertised WLTP range of 293 miles, you would need to see an average efficiency of over 3.8 miles per kilowatt hour if you're going to see that. 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour average was the order of the day though, with my time with it. Although I've not got the best track record for efficiency in my driving style. That would still see you with a real world range of over 200 miles, so it's not to be sniffed at admittedly, but it wasn't that drastically different in consumption from the full fat e-tron, which had far more power, weight, luxury, everything about it. Now, I'm not sure how much efficiency your average Audi SUV driver is expecting, so I guess it's a fairly neutral point. But I did expect a little bit better. I think those headline grabbing, it's pushing 300 miles of range. Yeah, how often are you going to get that required efficiency to see that? I don't know. And charging, I had no end of trouble with. I think I've been spoiled a bit with the e-tron 55 because it was extremely reliable where rapid charging was concerned. Remember, charging is included in the Onto subscription, so public rapid charging was how I charged it. There's no way I was going to charge it at home and pay for that myself when it was included in the subscription. But I'd almost forgotten that some EVs can actually be a bit of a pain to charge. Failing to communicate with certain chargers or needing a number of attempts to try and try again to get it to start, because with the e-tron 55 I never had to think about it. Plug it in, charged, it's fine. I definitely can't say the same for the Q4, unfortunately. It failed to start charging numerous times. It was particularly flaky with the 50 kilowatt Raptian chargers that Osprey have got on their network. And there's loads of them in Scotland too, on ChargePlus Scotland. But I even had it fail to start on Instavolt on some of their tritium units, which are normally absolutely rock solid. Charging speed once it got going was a bit meh as well, not getting anywhere near its top charging speed despite being on chargers that could provide it. It's irritating that so many cars just don't seem to have very good charging capability. And I think the marketing people are leading you down the garden path by talking about huge charge rates and quick charging times, 20 to 80% in 18 minutes and all this stuff, and yet in reality it doesn't always materialise. Now hopefully either Audi or the charger manufacturers will iron out these issues with the Q4. Maybe it's even been improved already through firmware updates since I tested it. But normally what happens is, one, i.e. the car manufacturer, just blames the other, the charger manufacturer operator, and vice versa for ages, and nothing gets done. This was certainly the case with BP Pulse and MG, where there was that charging issue where with the ZS EV it would just stop charging at like 72%. It would come up with an error, and maybe if you waited to get the machine going again it'd be fine, but generally it was just a pain. Both the manufacturer and the charge point operator just blamed each other and nobody ever fixed anything. I'm pretty sure that problem still exists today. It's awful. But I think you get the picture on the Q4 e-tron. It definitely wasn't for me. Unlike the e-tron 55, which I was absolutely gutted to see go, I was delighted when the day came where I could hand it back to Onto and just forget it ever existed. I would definitely not recommend it, and I'm sure you'll disagree with me massively in the comments, but so be it. What I will say, if you're thinking about one, rent one from Onto for a month, give it a proper test. Because if you wait a year for it to be delivered, and you hate it, and all you've had is a 10-minute test drive around the block from the dealer, that's going to really hurt. Don't get me wrong, with the demand for them, you might not lose a load of money, but you will be gutted. I do wonder how the Skoda Enyaq compares. It's a very similar car for all intents and purposes, built on the same platform, trying to fulfill exactly the same purpose for a little bit less money. Not that much less by the time you spec it up, of course. I wonder if the ride will be a bit softer and the seats a bit more comfortable. Maybe I'll get to drive one day and find out. Maybe not once the VW Group press people see this video. Still, at the end of the day, who cares about my opinion? Audi can't build them fast enough, the waiting list's absolutely huge, so they must be doing something right, eh? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.